Good morning, everyone. So when you're the 8 a.m. speaker, it means one of two things: that you're so pivotal to this entire conference that you build the foundation so that everything goes well, or you're just entertaining enough because everybody's hungover and they really don't want to be here. So I'm going to let my massive ego believe that it's because I'm that good and I'm building the foundation, right? I need a show of hands. Anybody here a resident? Are there any residents here? No, all attending. And can you tell me how many of you are in private practice? And how many of you are in academics? And how many of you have either done Wordle today or are doing it right now? Got two back here, 3 and 4. Okay, good. I like Wordle. I think it's very good. Does anybody know the background of Wordle? Wordle's like a tech geek that he was doing some work for somebody and he built it for his partner, his wife partner. And they did it just for fun to have a game to play. And it started to take off. It got really busy and he was doing it all the time, making new words and doing different stuff. And it got so hot that the New York Times bought it for over $1 million from him. And today, I think there's something like 30 million users, something like that worldwide that are doing Wordle. But I do think it's really interesting on the slide that it's not my people that are doing it. I thought the baby boomers would be the people doing Wordle because isn't it like the brain exercising thing where if you do it, then I won't get Alzheimer's quite as fast? But it turns out it's not. It's the millennials. And I think that's really interesting. So they're not going to get Alzheimer's, and I guess I am. I don't know what that really means, but or I already have it. I'm not really sure. But I do like Wordle. And if you're in the middle of it, I got it in 3 today, and good luck. See if you can beat my score. Um, so really weird job that I have. All I do is anesthesia for gastroenterology. I mean, I bet there's a bunch of you that are thinking, that's hell. That's what hell looks like. Right? Show of hands. How many think that's hell? Wow. Okay. Pretty, yeah, I get it. I get it. In my previous group, no one wanted to do it. My current group, no one wants to do it. Why do I do it? Um, my background, as said, is critical care and hearts. I did that for 30 years, loved it, and got tired of staying up all night. And I'm doing endoscopy at a tertiary care center. And so I do pretty sick people, most of them. Many of them need even invasive lines put in, prolonged mechanical ventilation, a lot of heavy duty stuff. So for me, I call it the endo ICU. I get to take care of really sick people like I like to do. And I get to provide a service for the gastroenterologist. And I don't work nights, weekends, holidays, or come up and stay all night anymore. So for me, it was a nice compromise for my swan song. Um, and I actually like it. I mean, it's really fascinating. If you dig into it, you get the right gastroenterologist and the right procedure, it can get interesting. But I do understand why most of you think it's hell. Um, these are my objectives. I was asked to provide some objectives. I'm not going to read the slides to you because I supposed to have a timer. I feel like I forgot something here. I have 72 minutes? No possible way. Okay, I'm going to go with this other clock, 8:04. All right. So these are my objectives, and I'm going to get to that stuff pretty quick because I want to get to some other stuff at the end that I think is really interesting. Because just doing gastroenterology anesthesia probably doesn't sound interesting to you. What do we do in the gastro lab? Well, probably colonoscopy is the number one procedure. Everybody here, I would imagine, is taking a look here, either had one or get close. The new age is 45. Does everybody know that? It's not 50 anymore, it's 45. So take a good look at the slide. That's where you're headed. Um, The other thing that's really cool about doing gastroenterology and doing anesthesia for gastroenterology, and I think the next speaker is going to talk about this a little bit, is it's probably the fastest growing area in the anesthesia profession is anesthesia outside of the operating room. And when you look at anesthesia outside of the operating room, gastroenterology is by far and away the largest portion of anesthesia outside of the operating room. This slide just kind of breaks down some of the things you know about ECT, things that go on the EP lab, the various areas where we're outside of the operating room. But gastroenterology is by far and away the largest. And I've told our chairman and our resident director, I spent my first 10 years at Ohio State, 18 years in private practice, and I came back 5 years ago to Ohio State to do this job. I said, you have got to get our residents down there into endoscopy a little bit because when they get to private practice, it's a huge part of the practice. I mean, how many of you would say it's a big part of your practice? So most of you, it's a big part, right? Okay, thanks. So I'm not lying to them, but it was a huge part of our practice at Riverside. We had 4, 5, 6 rooms every day. Anesthesia provided for we provided anesthesia for gastroenterology. So this is big, and there are some institutions around the country where they're approaching 35, 40% of their anesthetics are delivered outside of the operating room, with gastroenterology being primary. The growth is fairly obvious. This is just kind of telling you a little bit about showing you the cases that are being done with conscious sedation, where the gastroenterologists give pretty much only Versed and fentanyl versus anesthesia provided by us. And it is now almost typically 99% of the time it's propofol because of all the properties you all know about propofol. Again, all the payers are paying more money for anesthesia services for gastroenterology. My experience for, I'll be conservative, 10 years is we get paid. We don't get paid a lot, but we do get paid. I can't say I've seen a lot of claims denied. Commercial insurance isn't horrible, but the only way to make money is to do a lot of cases. So if you don't do a lot of cases, since it's a fairly small number, you don't make any money. But if you have an efficient unit, I work really hard to have our unit be 90% utilization, 17 minutes or less turnover time, gastroenterologists that get out of bed and come to the hospital on time. Some of the tricky parts of running a unit. You can make some money. There's money to be made, but you have to do a lot of cases because it's not big money. Everybody's paying, commercials paying, as well as Medicare and Medicaid. Medicaid's obviously horrible, but Medicare pays something. It's something, and like I said, the more cases you can do, the more money you can make. You can see that within the course of just a couple years, the prevalence of more anesthesia for gastroenterology and outside of the operating room services it just continues to grow. It's kind of started in the east. It's moving its way west. It's got pockets of places where it's done more and done less, but it is a growing opportunity. And as long as people get paid, I would assume that it'll stay this way. So you asked me to talk about aspiration. Well, I guess everyone in the back of their mind says, if all these patients that had conscious sedation that were basically awake, kind of watching the screen, carrying on, yelling, saying it hurt, all that, weren't aspirating. If we whack them out with a bunch of propofol, are they going to start aspirating? I mean, I think that's the question out there. And I think that there are a lot of biases in that question because I think everybody thinks that sedating people outside of the operating room and aspiration is similar to giving anesthetics in the operating room or in obstetrics and aspiration. And hopefully by the time I get done here, you realize that they're not apples to apples. What is aspiration and aspiration pneumonitis? We go back to Dr. Mendelssohn in 1946. Probably everybody here that went to medical school knows about this landmark work that he did. He looked at basically what do people aspirate and when does it make them have a long-term complication? Who aspirates? Um, Everybody here knows this. I want to just highlight ascites and GI pathology upper and lower just because that's what my world is basically all about. I see a lot of both of those things. And I want to talk a little bit about light anesthesia at the end because I think that's an interesting, tricky question about aspiration. Mendelssohn kind of showed a couple interesting things that if the pH was high or low, it affected outcome. And if the volume was high or low, it affected outcome as well. I think everybody here knows this stuff from med school or from residency. And I would throw in a third part of this is particulate matter. If it's particulate, it can definitely affect outcome. I'm not going to do a whole bunch of a little clock. There it is. I'm not going to do a whole bunch of the researchy statistical stuff because I don't think most people want to come to conferences and hear that. They want something they can take home and do in their hospital, make their day better. But there is some interesting work. There is some interesting work where people have tried to answer the question: if we're going to slam everybody in the GI lab with propofol, are we going to have people aspirating all over the place, right? So these people did, I kind of like what they did. They basically went into the search engines like PubMed and they put in aspiration, MAC or monitored anesthesia care, and adult. And they wanted to find as much data that had been published in one way or another, be it a study or be it a case report about people outside of the operating room getting anesthesia, not conscious sedation, and aspiration. It's interesting, they found 1,249 different things popped up. They put in their mesh subtitles. And as they started weaning out all the stuff that was kind of just somebody telling a story or somebody saying they think it was related or whatever, they started to, take out all these different distractors. You can see they went from 1,249 records, then they went to 766 records, down to 255 articles, down to 192 articles, and it ended up with 35 articles, 35 decent articles that basically looked at enough numbers that it wasn't just somebody saw something one day and kind of wrote it down. So 35 articles, that's not really a lot, I think. I mean, for as much of this stuff that's being done, I think that's a surprisingly small amount of research done in the area of aspiration during procedural sedation. But let me see if I could cone in here a little bit on the bottom line. If you get down to their results and their conclusions, there weren't that many aspirations. I'm just going to summarize. There weren't that many aspirations. The ones that occurred, about half were gastroenterology and the other half were every other procedure. And almost every single person got better. They had very, very few deaths. The deaths that they had were extraordinarily sick people. So if you've worked in the GI lab and done anesthesia, and they bring you somebody that's a stage 4 pancreas cancer that's on hospice, and they say the guy has black tarry stools and they want to do one last endoscopy to see where this is coming from. I mean, come on, you know, give me something to work with here. I mean, it's like those people are going to have problems. I mean, they are. But if we're talking about 50-year-olds coming in for screening colonoscopies, I think we're talking about something that is extremely rare and almost always takes care of itself. People get better. In the group they had, I think there were 10. I have one more slide. There were 10 that were gastroenterology. Everything else was from other procedures. Can you guess which procedure was most common in the 10 in gastroenterology? Does anybody have a guess? Correct. PEG tubes. 5 of the aspirations in gastroenterology in this gigantic search for complications were PEG tubes. Who's getting a PEG tube? Right? It's not athletes going to play football. I mean, my God, it's end of life care. It's ASA 3s and 4s, and it's people that are typically very, very ill. So this to me is a good study in terms of trying to get our arms around how bad is the situation? How bad is this thing we're talking about? This is another study I really like because this is fascinating to me. I've been in this academic thing for a long time, and I am amazed what people can get published. The garbage that can be just generated. I hope nobody here wrote this, but I mean, I am in shock sometimes what you can get published. These guys are from the UK, from Ontario, from Canada. They kind of did a similar thing where they looked at a gigantic cohort of conscious sedation versus anesthesia for colonoscopy. They wanted to know 3 things. If we give conscious sedation, a little Versed, a little fentanyl, versus giving propofol, do we have more perforation, malperforation? Do we have more splenic injury? And do we have more aspiration? You can see that their cohort was pretty big. I mean, they had quite a few patients. But if you look there at the bottom, they had 1 aspiration. They had 1 aspiration. Their conclusions were, and I can't believe this, their conclusions were, if you're using propofol for colonoscopy, you should inform your patients that they have a statistically increased risk of aspirating compared to not using propofol for colonoscopy. They had 1 aspiration, but it was statistically significant. Now, I have 2 thoughts about this. Number 1, and I hate to say it, I'm gonna put it at the end, and you can mull around with yourselves. If you practice in Canada, where it's a social health care system, and you have to pay extra money for these colonoscopies to get anesthesia, you're going to have a completely different response than in this country, where you have the ability to use your insurance, or whether or not you pay out of your pocket. I mean, I don't know about you, but every single day of my life, I hear, please, whatever happens, don't let me wake up in the middle of the colonoscopy. Every day of my life now, I hear that. The only way I can stop it is to give them propofol, because they say it because they had conscious sedation. Okay. In this study of lots of patients, hundreds of patients, they had 1 aspiration, but they're going, hey, you should tell the patients it's an increased risk. It's statistically significant. Well, think about how much money they save if they don't ever do it. It's a big deal. And I think where you practice and what kind of medical economic system you're in may sway your opinion about which is better, anesthesia for gastroenterology or conscious sedation for gastroenterology. I'm a little biased, so that's my opinion. My second thought is statistical significance is not clinical significance. I want to point that out when you read an article. One of my friends in the room, Ron Harder, and I, we've done some research over the years. If you can get to statistical significance, you might get it published. But you kind of turn your head and go, but it's really a horrible study, though. It really didn't change anything because it wasn't clinically significant, So it's a big issue. And I think that study, for me, doesn't really help me know anything. It just helped me realize that if you work hard enough, you can get something published. I want to talk about now, I want to diverge a little bit now. I have 11 minutes, I think. Is that right? 15 minutes? Okay. I want to talk about what I think is a big issue in this aspiration world. So everybody pretty much put their hand up that they have to do this stuff, right? So you're with your buddy, you're in the room, you got 25 uppers to do today, 25 EGDs to do today. of all sizes and shapes, right? I mean, you got some big players and you got some airway anatomy issues, and it's a challenging day, right? And you give something, you give a little propofol or whatever your thing is, and they put the scope down and they start to gag, right? And as they start to gag, sometimes their sats go down, right? So now you're faced with this dilemma in your head, right? You got 2 liters of oxygen running. You crank that to 6. That's probably not going to do anything. They're purple. They're a little purple. Do I make them deeper so they can tolerate the scope and breathe? Or do I make them lighter so that they don't get deeper and aspirate? Has anybody ever felt that feeling when you're in the lab doing these? Should I go deeper or lighter? And turning up the oxygen is not doing anything. Well, I think this is a huge issue in this whole aspiration and gastroenterology discussion. And here's why I think it. Because I don't think anybody knows the answer to what I just asked you, okay? But I think I figured it out. And I'm going to show it to you in a minute. I was so into this at one point, I found a device somebody made that was like this big tube that went down, and it was like an oral airway, but it was also the bite block. So if you could shove it into an awake person, which was challenging, if you could get it in there and then hurry up and give them propofol, then they would get their scope done, but they wouldn't obstruct. And then you would give them less propofol, they would breathe and they wouldn't obstruct. But it's a big issue. And I think that study for me doesn't really help me know anything. It just helped me realize that if you work hard enough, you can get something published. I want to talk about now, I want to diverge a little bit now. I have 11 minutes, I think. Is that right? 15 minutes? Okay. I want to talk about what I think is a big issue in this aspiration world. So everybody pretty much put their hand up that they have to do this stuff, right? So you're with your buddy, you're in the room, you got 25 uppers to do today, 25 EGDs to do today of all sizes and shapes, right? I mean, you got some big players and you got some airway anatomy issues, and it's a challenging day, right? And you give something, you give a little propofol or whatever your thing is, and they put the scope down and they start to gag, right? And as they start to gag, sometimes their sats go down, right? So now you're faced with this dilemma in your head, right? You got 2 liters of oxygen running, you crank that to 6. That's probably not going to do anything. They're purple. They're a little purple. Do I make them deeper so they can tolerate the scope and breathe? Or do I make them lighter so that they don't get deeper and aspirate? Has anybody ever felt that feeling when you're in the lab doing these? Should I go deeper or lighter? And turning up the oxygen is not doing anything. Well, I think this is a huge issue in this whole aspiration and gastroenterology discussion. And here's why I think it. Because I don't think anybody knows the answer to what I just asked you, okay? But I think I figured it out. And I'm going to show it to you in a minute. I was so into this at one point, I found a device somebody made that was like this big tube that went down, and it was like an oral airway, but it was also the bite block. So if you could shove it into an awake person, which was challenging, if you could get it in there and then hurry up and give them propofol, then they would get their scope done, but they wouldn't obstruct. And then you would give them less propofol, they would breathe and they wouldn't obstruct. But I couldn't find anybody that could tolerate it. It was so big and it was all the way down behind the back of their tongue, and it didn't work. It was a bomb. I mean, it failed. And then I stumbled onto something called high flow nasal cannula, high flow nasal cannula. And high flow nasal cannula is a fascinating idea. It's put a nasal cannula in, instead of running at 3 or 4 liters a minute, run it at 100 liters a minute. Now, we were all told in medical school you can't do that because their nose will dry out and they'll bleed and it's bad and it doesn't work very well. Well, if you humidify it and you only do it for half an hour, it probably doesn't cause any problems at all, right? But let's look at all the good things that it does. And somebody in the room will probably think of it, and I haven't done it yet, but I would like to. How does it affect how much propofol you give, right? I mean, this is if you got a resident or a med student and you want to get into doing a research project, this is about as good as one as there is. Because what if you give a third of any anesthetic because you don't have an obstructed airway in gastroenterology? I mean, this even applies to the colonoscopies, right? How many times have we done a colonoscopy and if we give them enough propofol, they're obstructing, bucking, the scope is flying all over the place. The guy's pooping all over the gastroenterologist and the nurse. There's lots of noises occurring in the room that are unpleasant. And it's all from airway obstruction. It's all airway obstruction. I mean, I had one guy one day, I was so worried about it, and before I got into this, he had his CPAP machine with him. So I put it on a stool and I hooked it up to his face, and then they did his colonoscopy, and he laid there quietly and he had his colonoscopy. And we gave him propofol, and I didn't even think about him aspirating. I wasn't worried about it because he didn't need hardly any. You know, where in the past, with all the bucking and carrying on, it's like, do I go deeper or do I go lighter? The question is out there. But let me show you what this thing does. This is kind of cool. Traditional low flow oxygen, it's the question I'm talking about. Under sedated and aware or over sedated and apneic, you know? Where are we? Where am I in this anesthetic when I got 2 liters running and the patient's bucking and they have a scope down in their mouth? We don't really know the answer to that. Where with high flow nasal oxygen, we can talk about figuring out maybe a little bit about if we can take the obstruction part out of the equation, then we can kind of concentrate on how much sedation to give. I want to move along fairly quickly because I want to show you a video. This is starting to hit publications that are coming to your mailbox. A lot of the throwaways, the journals, you may be seeing it, you may not, but it's starting to pick up a little bit of momentum. It's an ICU product. That's where its home has been for a long time. But now it's finding its way into other worlds and specifically into the NORA world. It is becoming almost like crazy exciting in the NORA world. I work with nurse anesthetist residents and AAs, and we got 6 of these machines, and to the person in our 6 rooms, the answer is this is a game changer. This has completely changed their ability to feel comfortable about what they're doing. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. How does it work? How does it work? Well, this is really cool since I'm a critical care guy and I love ventilation. It does a lot of good stuff at 100 liters a minute. It's washing CO2 out by bulk flow, so there's no CO2 in the oral cavity, and so CO2 can be removed. It creates PEEP. It creates a little bit of CPAP. You know, a little bit of CPAP sometimes is all you need in a lot of these folks that obstruct when there's a scope in there. I always say real estate, right? You know, you take one of the smallest people in the room here with a tiny little airway and a tiny little mouth, you got a pretty good sized scope in there, not oxygen running, mask on. Well, there's not a lot of room in there for breathing, you know? So if we can use pressure to make more room, I think that's pretty cool. It helps with inspiratory demand so that they're not trying to overcome the obstruction with every breath. So there's not the bucking and all the excitement that you see. And the device that has hit the market is, they were smart. They humidified it. And they took that fear out of the whole discussion. So it's not 30 minutes and I'm all dried out and have a bloody nose. It's heavily humidified so that they don't have that problem. This is my video. I don't have any sound because I'm going to describe it. I'd rather describe it than hear the guy talk about it. I didn't make it. Some other guy did. I don't know who he is. Let's see. Where is he? Tech guys. We tried this. We think we know how to do it. Hello? Somebody's got a mouse. Oop, I got to go back. Has somebody got a mouse? Oh, okay. Let it run for a minute. Maybe that's the problem. It's the highlight of my show. Anybody like the 70s? I could sing a little bit. No, never mind. What do we think? Okay. I want you guys to know I got up a half an hour early to come over and make sure this works. So like I'm really into this. All right, let me start to describe it and maybe somebody can make it work. I see the guy back there that tells me he knows how to do it, so they'll figure it out. What happened is this guy, he took the high flow nasal cannula system up. He's an ear, nose, and throat doc, and he slid a tiny little 3 or 4 millimeter laryngoscope down along the nose and down into the airway and got the guy all numbed up. And the person that he did it to had a high propensity for obstruction. And he put the camera looking at the cords as he changed the amount of high flow. So what you're going to see when this begins to work is that it just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger until when you get to 100 liters a minute, it's wide open. There is no obstruction. There is open cords, no tongue on the posterior pharynx, none of the stuff that we typically deal with. And so that real estate that I was talking about is now, oh, there it is. We got it. There we go. So it's a 56-year-old male with a diagnosis of OSA. This is by a fellow that does this kind of work, and this is what I was telling you. So he's got it so he's tolerating the camera and the high flow without any, bucking or anything. And he starts at 30 liters a minute. And as you can see at 30 liters a minute, there's a little bit of an opening there, and you can't see the cords, but you can start to see things. He jacks it up to 50 liters a minute. Now you're starting to see a little bit more. I mean, it's impressive, right? All of a sudden, airway obstruction is starting to go away. He goes to 70 liters a minute. Now you're starting to see the vocal cords. And as you start to see the vocal cords and you get up to 70 liters a minute, you can see that it's a wide open airway. There's room for the scope, there's room to breathe, there's room for everything. Now, as we back it back down to go to 50 liters a minute, back down to 30, and back down to no flow, look what you've got. You've got a completely obstructed airway. I mean, it's almost so simple that it's ridiculous. I can't believe I never thought of this. It's just that silly. It's just amazing, but it's real. It's real, and it's been a game changer for us at our hospital. Um, I understand requests are coming in from all the other NORA sites. They wanted an EP. They want it, wherever we're doing NORA, our people work there too. So they say, I want those machines. And they walk over and go, can I take the machine over? And I go, no, you're not taking the machine anywhere, okay? I'm not letting my stuff go anywhere. It took me 2 years to get this. I saw this at a meeting 2 years ago, and it took 2 years to get it. So, but I just really want to emphasize, I get no money from this company. I have nothing to do with them financially. I have nothing to disclose. I have nothing to do with the company, okay? They would like to give me money. We're the #1 user of the device right now in the world at Ohio State in our gastroenterology unit, just after like a year of getting it. But I'm not in this for the money. I'm too old for that. I just like it. And I like how easy it's made doing this kind of work. Um, just a couple of things here in my last 2 or 3 minutes. Tons of data out there about high flow nasal cannula if you want to read about it. It's extraordinarily safe. I hear 2 things people talk about that you probably want to think about if you're going to use it. Number 1, fire in the airway. Probably need to think twice about having some guy burning stuff in the back of the throat using high flow nasal cannula. and 100% oxygen. That probably could cause an ignition. And secondly, anything open. You know, a guy cracks his head, he's got an open fracture, he's got a, what do they call that, Lafort's, all the different facial fractures, open skull fractures, all that. We did have one patient that had some sort of a, I don't remember what it was, something, some mucosal tear or whatever. And when we got done, his head was kind of like a pumpkin. But you don't want to have anything open in the mucosa, or it'll blow air in. It's pressure, right? So you don't want to do that. They have some new integrations. They're improving their equipment all the time. It does have end-tidal CO2 on it, which now that's huge, because now you're using all of the 7 monitors that you're supposed to be using when you're doing an anesthetic. You're not just winging it. So you're actually seeing that they're breathing, as well as providing, you know, looking at pulse oximetry. I wouldn't say the number means very much. I doubt if it does, from a couple studies I've done about end-tidal CO2, but at least I know they're breathing. At least I know air is going in and out, and I think that's huge. I'm going to leave you in 47 seconds with questions. I guess I'm available in a panel, but I like these questions because I wrote them. Does anything we discussed cause you to want to change your practice? I mean, is this a talk that makes you want to go home and do anything different? How does this information affect your thoughts on NPO guidelines? I didn't get into that very much. One of the other variables in that big giant study, they showed no difference in aspiration between the patients that abided by their NPO guidelines and those that ignored them, and they were considered the outliers that didn't do NPO. Really interesting. Do you believe you see aspiration at your institution? Or is this just something everybody thinks they see and they really don't see that much? And then lastly, the Canadian issue and money. So there you go. That's all I have, and I'm 9 seconds. Thanks. Great. Love it. Yep.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Woda. Our next speaker is Dr. Guy Williams. Dr. Guy Williams is the recipient of the ROTC HPSP scholarships. He attended NECOM 1984, division surgeon, field artillery, after family practice internship, did anesthesia residency at Walter Reed, in private practice in Colorado, pediatric fellowship at the University of Colorado, and now attending staff pediatric anesthesiologist for the last 18 years at Children's Hospital in Omaha and several years at UNMC. He'll be speaking on critical considerations and patient selection in NORA, non-operating room anesthesia. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Williams.
Thank you, Jim. Good morning, everyone. I thank you for Dr. Woda actually making the foundation for my talk and making it stronger. But I was going to ask him why he might have chosen GI endoscopy anesthesia, but after thinking about it for a moment, I knew there was an opening. Today, we're literally diving into non-operating room anesthesia, and you'll see why that term is important in just a little bit. Imagine the complex, precise environment of our familiar operating room transformed into such areas as the cardiac cath lab, endoscopy suites, interventional radiology, virtually any location that you can imagine. NORA is transforming anesthesia patient care outside of the operating room, and like Dr. Woda said, currently it represents 25% of all the perioperative space. I've been told it's important for me to mention any disclosure of interest, but despite my best attempts, no one has offered me money, sports cars, or vacations to represent any of their materials. So you can rest assured this morning that my best intention is to provide you with a great lecture in anesthesia. I wanted to thank Dr. Jessica Galler first for inviting me today. She's someone I really admire. She's a professor, and she's so uplifting and encouraging at work every day, and it makes it a pleasure to work there. And I'm not sure if you know it or not, but she brought several anesthesiologists to this program. So they're a large part of this program. Also, today I'd like to dedicate my lecture to Dr. Desmond Henry. Dr. Henry was a friend of mine at University of Colorado Children's Hospital. He changed my life. He's responsible for me being here today. Dr. Henry, when I came to interview, I had been in private practice for 10 years at a local community hospital, a small place with like 3 operating rooms. And we didn't have non-operating room anesthesia. And that's why some of the reason I chose this topic. It was very interesting to me. And I get excited when I go to work and I work in MRI. But Dr. Desmond Henry, when I went to interview, he said, you know, Guy, you have lots of experience in the Army, you're in private practice, you're board certified, but I'm sorry, everybody here has performed a fellowship in pediatric anesthesia. And my heart kind of sank, and I thought that was the end of the interview. But Dr. Henry looked up for a minute, he goes, we've never done this before, but what if we offer you a position as a fellow? And it changed my life, and it put me on a course that has transformed my family, where I practice, and what I do. I chose 3 objectives today to make it brief and to the point. We're going to recognize the unique challenges of non-operating room anesthesia. Imagine the operating room where you have assistants at your beck and call. We have state-of-the-art anesthesia machines and monitors, but in the non-operating room center, it's not that way, and I'll speak about that in a moment. I'll describe patient selection to help ensure safety and optimize outcomes. And I'll discuss risk strategies that can prevent the basic causes of injuries and death. Now let's prepare for what non-operating room anesthesia has in store for us beyond the operating room. Our journey will begin in an unfamiliar environment similar to places that you have to go to perform anesthesia. It can take place in the most challenging and unconventional environments. In no situation is an anesthesiologist needed to safely demonstrate vigilance and safety of practice. Sometimes it's life or death. And I'd like to begin with a great story. This story is about Dr. Richard Harris. He's an Australian anesthesiologist, and his speaking reminds me of Dr. Geller, so it's kind of exciting. He's also a cave diver of the last 30 years. This is the situation. 5 years ago, he was tasked with the effort of rescuing 12 boys in Thailand and their coach. These boys were trapped underground. The boys had hiked 2.5 miles into a cave system and were approximately 1/2 mile underground. Monsoon rains quickly surrounded and flooded the cave, trapping the boys. The oxygen was diminishing and the water was rising. The boys quickly sought higher ground, and they were losing hope. They weren't sure if everyone knew where they were. Dr. Harris knew that they would all die if something wasn't done. This was a last-ditch effort, a life-saving event, and they were running out of time. Dr. Harris developed a plan to keep the boys anesthetized with ketamine while spontaneously breathing through a full face mask. Ketamine was a medication to anesthetize them, and atropine was used to help dry up secretions and prevent choking. The boys and their coach were removed from the cave systems one by one. Wetsuits were applied to the boys. Oxygen tanks were strapped to their chest, and their bodies were bound to a board. It looked something like this. The boys were accompanied by 2 divers, one in the front and one in the back. The board was on a rope system and pulled through the cave system. The divers were not medical personnel, but were instructed on how to administer the ketamine every 40 minutes directly through the wetsuits. These 14 medical divers, foreign divers, and 5 members of the Thai Navy SEALs brought the boys out in 3 stages. It took the rescuers literally 5 hours to pass through the cave, and they weren't sure that everyone would survive. Before I share this short video with you, I wanted to remind you of this historical event. This event represents non-operating room anesthesia in an austere environment. I chose this example to demonstrate the true value that you have as anesthesiologists. It's heartwarming to know that Dr. Harris is a true hero. I encourage you to watch this video and movie at home, called The Rescue. It's produced by National Geographic's.
Breaking news right now out of Thailand.
Rescue teams are working through the night to save 12 boys and their coach trapped inside a cave.
The monsoon had come early. The conditions in the cave were impossible. There was a very strong feeling that the children couldn't be still alive.
We need expert cave divers out here.
The Thai Navy SEALs put everything they had into it, but only this group of people who do it as a weekend hobby has those skills.
I was thinking, this has actually got our name all over it.
You couldn't see your hand in front of your face. Trying to wriggle through holes that I couldn't wriggle through, finding a bigger space, sliding through, and then repeating again and again.
How many of you? 13?
We look into each other's faces thinking we may be the only ones that ever see them.
Finding the boys was the easy part. They didn't have a clue how to get those kids out.
We didn't think it was possible to dive the children out. We came up with the actual logistical plan.
I told him that's a horrible idea. And then Rick said, what if it's the only idea?
We were brutally honest. We promised multiple fatalities.
It's about controlling your emotions and your fear. Panic is death in the cave.
My mind was on overdrive. Oh my God, am I going to be good enough? If they die, it's going to tear me apart.
If you don't dive, everyone will die.
I told the guys, this is a one-way trip. Once you start, you cannot stop.
Believe. Believe.
Just as Dr. Harris faced many perils in the cave, working in a community hospital, we may not be aware of these perils when operating in a NORA situation. There can be challenging environments. Often we have to overcome cramped spaces. Non-operating room spaces frequently are very small, and there's equipment that may be secondhand. There's equipment that's not used very often, equipment that you may even have to train yourself on again to learn and understand how to work. There's often inadequate monitors and equipment that hasn't been routinely checked. And their staff, they're happy to help us, but they're not sure quite how to help an anesthesiologist. There's many complex procedures that involve cerebral embolizations and advanced endoscopic ultrasound procedures that place the patients in all kinds of positions and even prone. And that can even be more of a problem with obese patients. There's many safety issues because we have older patients and we have very small neonates, but they have multiple comorbidities. Like this unexpected cave rescue, NORA can occur after hours or even as emergencies. These become a balancing act of challenging environments, complex procedures, and ongoing safety issues. So why is NORA important today in 2024? We're being tasked to increase accessibility for patients of these services. It takes our expertise and our training to safely provide anesthesia in these remote locations. We frequently leverage innovations such as our compact anesthesia machines that are portable and syringe pumps that can provide a myriad, starting with sedation to full general anesthesia. We can raise and lower blood pressures. We can sedate and smoothly wake up the patient so we don't have screaming children, and the nurses love us. We leverage things such as wireless technology sensors that can immediately integrate our data, our documentation of medications, and quickly alert us to changes in vital signs. They can predict airway patency problems. There's more rapid awareness that allows us to avoid adverse effect. There's tremendous healthcare systems, and they're becoming very interested because the inpatient beds are no longer needed, and the resources for traditional operating rooms are no longer required. NORA also captures this revenue and generates patient cost savings, so it's a win-win solution. So what underlying principles do we really need to follow. There can be tremendous production pressure in non-operating room anesthesia, and shortcuts can be made. In NORA, there's always a requirement for effective anesthesia regardless of the location. As a Scoutmaster and father of an Eagle Scout, I borrowed these two principles I think that can guide us. The law is a principle followed as a code of conduct which reflects our actions and behaviors. It's a principle that we teach the boys. An example would be a scout is trustworthy, loyal, helpful, friendly. We teach the boys to be better citizens. It reflects their actions, and we tell them as members, it's not just a good idea, but it's the law. As anesthesiologists, our code of conduct and behaviors to protect our patients during non-operating room anesthesia, regardless of the location, making sure that we have everything prepared, that we investigate everything that we need, and we have plans A, B, and C. The second principle is called ARF. I don't know if anyone's heard it before, but maybe if you've been in the military, you're familiar with it, or in scouting, but it stands for an abbreviation that means something that's contradictory: absolute rigid flexibility. It means being flexible enough to pivot, to make changes without compromising our core beliefs. As anesthesiologists, that means diligence and safety reflects our behavior. We abide in these principles just like in the cave because there's many dangers that may not be immediately sensed that can cause injuries to ourselves or to our patients. These include hidden risks such as ionizing radiation that can cause leukemia and thyroid cancer and cataracts. It can cause genetic mutations and congenital birth defects. Risks are reduced by wearing leaded glasses and thyroid shields and leaded gowns and staying a distance of 6 feet from the source. But there's also airway patency failures. These occur more often, as Dr. Woda mentioned, maybe in more complex patients that are obese. They have obstructive sleep apnea, requiring nasal trumpet or oral airway. And when an LMA is used, they may have inadequate fasting or reflux, placing them at risk for aspiration. A 3 Tesla machine, an MRI, has 30,000 times the gravitational force of the Earth. Metal objects simple as a pen or a battery that's not for an MRI and a laryngoscope handle can cause flying objects to be hurled at the magnet, injuring our staff or our patient. These magnetic frequencies also are converted into heat and cause our patient to be heated. So 1 hour of MRI time is equivalent to raising their body temperature 1 degree Fahrenheit. These patients are at risk for overheating. Metal oxides aren't considered to be in eye makeup and eyeliner, but they are, as well as tattoos, and they can cause burning of the skin. Metal jewelry, such as piercings and earrings, also cause a reason to be alerted for causing skin burns. Patients don't realize that if their hands touch their trunk or their feet are together, that the MRI can create an electrical field and cause burns at the sites of contact. The cardiac cath lab is often very cold, and shivering can occur, increasing oxygen consumption, causing increased heart rates and vasoconstriction. They can place the patient at risk for arrhythmias, fibrillation, and cardiac arrest. The wetsuits on the children help prevent heat loss, and we can also keep our patients warm with heat lamps and bear huggers or warm blankets, especially small infants. Contrast nephropathies can occur for repeated use of contrast, especially in patients with comorbid disease. So what do studies tell us about non-operating room anesthesia? Injuries. We talked about the risks that are there, but do injuries really occur? In 2023, I've selected these 3 articles that I think will highlight the cause of these injuries. NORA was found to have a higher respiratory complication rate, twice that of the operating room. Information was gathered from multiple healthcare systems, and these risks were thought to be due to varied environment and procedural complexities. In 2022, the Anesthesia Closed Claim Project also identified adverse effects occurring twice as often, especially in cardiology and radiology. NORA settlements averaged $450,000 from death or disabilities. Alternatively, operating room claims were from surgical errors. The 2021 Anesthesiology Journal noted a mortality rate of 2 per 10,000, which is similar to what we have in the operating room. But these were linked to either emergency procedures or patients with those comorbidities. NORA cases have a higher frequency of severe injuries and death. In more than half of the NORA cases, patients were deemed to have received substandard anesthesia care, and that's why we play such a pivotal role. So what are the top 2 complications that every 2 anesthesiologists should know? They would be respiratory compromise, of course, with gradual hypoxia and obstruction of the airway. These compose 60% of the problems. In cardiovascular failure, hypotension, hypertension, or injury to the heart comprise 40%. So it's very important to understand the physiology of your patient and pathology preoperatively when planning your anesthetic. Just like in scouting, it's important to plan ahead and be prepared. So how can patient selection mitigate some of these risks? Medical history, as we've been told in earlier lectures, is very important. We need to look at the comorbidities and dig into the anesthesia history, starting with medications and any adverse reactions. Have they had a good airway evaluations? Is there any pearls left in the chart from other anesthesiologists that we can gain to help prevent any injuries? What is their functional status? Do they get short of breath with activities of daily living? Do they get fatigued? Do they have prior strokes or MIs? Are they non-compliant with taking their medications? Physical exams are very important, starting with the Mellon-Potty score, but also examining mouth opening and range of neck motion. Also, the size of their neck and things that interfere with intubation are also very important. Risk stratification is reflected in the ASA class 3 or 4, but that brings to mind severe systemic disease or even a constant threat to life. And these patients, of course, should be considered on a case-by-case basis. So let's talk about additional tools for evaluating risk. I found the Revised Cardiac Risk Index is very helpful. It's a tool that estimates a patient's risk of cardiac complications, and it's particularly useful in non-cardiac surgeries. It takes into account 6 clinical factors: ischemic heart disease, MI, or positive stress test, congestive heart failure, patients that have diabetes that are on insulin, chronic kidney disease, particularly when creatinine is greater than 2 milligrams per deciliter, high-risk surgeries including intrathoracic, intraperitoneal, or vascular surgeries. Each of these factors is assigned 1 point, and the score predicts major cardiac complications within 30 days of the surgery. Let's look at some of these risks. 0 point is very low risk, but is not no risk. It composes 1%. 1 point is low risk and is also 2%. 2 points is intermediate risk and jumps to 6%, and 3 or more points is high risk. The scale is straightforward and may point towards the patient from benefiting from further cardiac testing or optimization. So let's talk about procedure considerations. The duration and complexity of the procedures may require more monitoring. Arterial lines, CVPs, maybe a BIS monitor to monitor depths of anesthesia. These may not be available in distant locations. Patients with elevated BMI or obstructive sleep apnea should be evaluated closely for suitability in these locations and may benefit from remaining in the operating room. Should we consider sedation or general anesthesia? This should be based on the nature of the procedure, and for moderate sedation, it's important to note that the patient must maintain their own airway independently, and this may not be possible. For general anesthesia, we have to consider, can we intubate this patient? Do we need a video scope? Do we need bougies? Do we need an extra pair of skilled hands? Can we obtain help from the emergency room or from the ICU? Can physicians quickly come and help us? And lastly, what other resources do we have greater control over? Dr. Dane Grenda mentioned pre-surgical timeout. We established clear communication channels among the NORA team, the anesthesiologist, the proceduralist, and the nursing staff. At the timeout, before the start of surgery, responsibilities should be assigned to each person. Staff should be able to call immediately for additional help and equipment if problems arise. There should be robust resources, and I'm happy to say that Dr. Geller is responsible for continuing the same types of monitors that we have throughout the hospital, and anesthesia carts and medication carts and things to help prevent any errors. Checklists and emergency phone numbers need to be immediately available, and we have to determine if these locations have self-inflating bags, additional oxygen, and eliminate such things as the lack of airway carts when we need a cricothyroidotomy. Staff training should be practiced along with simulation for the exact purposes that NORA has emergencies. We should adhere to standardized safety protocols for sedation and eliminate distractions, such as turning the music down and paying more attention. But what does NORA hold for the future? It has great promise. As Dr. Woda mentioned, NORA has the promise of greater than 50% of operating room case in the perioperative space. AI modeling, such as Dr. Jeffrey Joseph mentioned, of testing in medical devices, real-time integration will improve safety protocols, and analytics will actually be built into a national anesthesia outcome registry to help improve outcomes. Learning algorithms will help predict and avoid complications, improving workflow efficiency, and Envision medications will help avoid the complications of narcotic anesthetics. High quality care, regardless of the location and the type of procedure being performed, is very important. The collaborative efforts of the NORA team reinforce the importance of us as individuals being familiar with these areas, preparing ahead, knowing our patients thoroughly. I'd like you to reflect for a minute and think about, is your hospital prepared to provide this much NORA anesthesia in the future? Are you prepared? Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Williams. Our next speaker is Dr. Kelsey Cucarosa. Dr. Kelsey Cucarosa is a native Californian and has completed most of her education in the Golden State. After graduating college, she volunteered at a coroner's office and affiliated with the Sheriff's Department, performing autopsies, including forensic evaluations in suspected homicide cases. Outside volunteer hours, she worked as a medical malpractice law firm specializing in defense. While in anesthesia residency, she became curious about operating room operations, scheduling optimization, and OR leadership, leading her to pursue advanced training in the management of perioperative services at Stanford University. She's conducted quality improvement and research projects on EMR-based database analysis, OR data integrity, and OR delays. Dr. Cucarosa is interested in continuing education efforts focused at OR models, organizational optimization, and leadership. She'll be speaking on Organized, Optimized, Operate, an overview of ASC management. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Cucarosa.
Thank you for that kind introduction, and thank you everyone for coming out on a Sunday. I know it's early. I was extremely thankful because I got a few consecutive hours of sleep. My baby is not here with me, so that was nice. And we're going to be talking about today an overview of different ASC management styles, models, priorities that you should consider if you're in a position where you're going to be making decisions for your ASC, and building brands in your culture at your ASC is also vitally important. I don't have any disclosures today other than I was asked to come here and give this speak, and as mentioned in the bio, I did complete a non-ACGME fellowship in the management of perioperative services at Stanford, which includes some courses at the Graduate School of Business as well. I don't think there were many residents in here at the beginning poll by Dr. Woda, but if there are now and you have questions about this fellowship, please come up to me and ask. I really enjoyed it. We do have some learning objectives. It's important for all of us to get our CME here today. We're going to be talking about ASC management priorities, summarizing some financial considerations and opportunities, so ways to maximize your revenue and profit and ways to minimize the cost of your ASC, and then again, defining your brand and culture because it is a business at the end of the day. We won't be talking about some of the more comprehensive topics such as CMS regulations, legal considerations, contract negotiations, like any infrastructure designs. Those are just beyond the scope of what we would be able to cover today. Those merit probably their own discussion. So as most of us are probably aware, an ASC or ambulatory surgery center, to sum it up, probably historically was an outpatient, same-day discharge, kind of healthier side elective surgery. Definitely pushing the limits more today. I think we're branching towards that ASA 3 range. We at Stanford are actually keeping patients overnight in our ASC, so doing 23-hour obs and discharging the next morning. So that is taking a patient base that you would typically have in the hospital and shifting it to our ASC. We also, in addition to doing elective, do semi-elective and sometimes urgent cases, so same-day clinic washouts that they see. There are classically 5 models that get referred to when you're talking about an ASC management style. I like to lump some of them into the joint venture just because they cover kind of like the similar structure. Firstly, you will have an independent ASC model, and that is classically a physician-owned. If it is physician-owned, there tends to be a management company that is involved to help run the ASC, and they'll take about anywhere from 3 to 7% of the net profit revenue for that center. Joint venture is when you're going to have a team that's a combo, so physician with a hospital or a hospital with a management group or any combination of the 3. And then your macro system is a term that I like to use because hospitals are really becoming their own ecosystem and macro system and getting their fingers into every part of healthcare. And so that is going to be your hospital-owned ASC where the physician is just an employee. There are 3 overarching domains that you can kind of lump decision criteria into when you're considering things for your ASC. There's the clinical, operational, and economic considerations. Granted, as you can see, these all do overlap. So any decision that you make in one domain is going to inherently impact the other. So if you make a clinical decision for patient care, that at the end of the day is going to actually affect your business and how things are even run operationally and economically. We're going to be talking about different types of ASC priorities. You can see this list here, but I would like to highlight how some of these different priorities can kind of be lumped into those 3 domain areas, again, with the caveat that they do overlap. So if you're going to look at quality care and patient safety, that would be one of those like clinical domains. Management systems, your data, those are going to go into more of like the economic domain, and then having an efficient, optimized OR with good leadership skills and policies in place, that's going to be more of your operational circle. And just to give a glimpse into how massive the ASC market is, in 2022, these are just rough estimations, depending on what source you read, was about estimated to be around like the $40 to $50 billion range for US surgeries. In 2023, that number increased to the higher towards more $50 billion. By 2030, it's estimated to be upwards of $75 billion. So quite impressive. For the ASC management priorities, I think most of us can all agree that quality care and patient safety are going to be a top priority. You really want to be the choice center and be known for providing top quality care. And that's going to include things like monitoring your patient outcomes. So are you watching for bounce backs or surgical site infections, your acute care hospital transfers? All of those things are really important to not just watch for. There's also patient satisfaction that is going to help with referral streams. And then quality improvement. Just because we're not in a hospital setting doesn't mean that we shouldn't take actions to try and monitor our care and ways to constantly improve and have actionable items. Having continuous performance and target assessments is really important. You want to make sure that you are being productive, that you are maintaining those referral streams, that you are having proper cases with growth and growth potential. You want to have ways to monitor your financials and making sure that you are operating in the green and not constantly in the red. Are you meeting the mission and vision goals that you have set for your center? And again, evaluating that competitor that you have, the ASC that's in a town over. Patients have a lot of choices nowadays, and you really want to have that competitive advantage, especially given how I just highlighted the ASC market is going to be growing in the next couple years. Having accurate data and management systems, this can be a costly upfront area for most ASCs, but it is critically important because it can help with so many workflow, labor costs. Really any business, even outside of healthcare, benefits from having a really good automated data management system. It will help with your case times, block availability, inventory, so trying to avoid things such as the bullwhip effect, which is where there's a disconnect between your supply chain and your actual ordering that occurs. Billing, profit estimations, authorizations. I think probably many of us have experienced where patients show up the day of surgery and it's not covered by insurance, and a lot of people can't afford outpatient a cash pay surgery. And then having automated workflows, because labor costs are astronomically expensive, and if you can minimize that variable cost, that can help you with your profit area. I'll talk about optimized and efficient ORs in a couple slides. I go a little more in depth into. But having strong leadership and engagement is also a top priority for an ASC. Having physician leadership with that knowledge and that experience. Having incentive alignment. I know this is something probably all of us painfully try to experience every day when we're dealing with turnover times, or as was mentioned, the pressure to roll back and production pressure. So making sure you have incentive alignment, not with just the surgeon, but the entire OR, your patient. You want everyone to kind of be on the same page, and that comes from strong leadership. And then having that competitive advantage and having employee satisfaction. A little bit on the competitive advantage. With the way that payers are moving, they are trying to do what's called a site-neutral repayment. Traditionally, hospitals, if they own an ASC, they can bill at a hospital contracted rate for their center and they get a higher repayment. However, with now payers moving towards the site neutral instead, including Medi-Cal, there won't be a benefit to operating at a hospital ASC style, because ASCs traditionally reimburse about like 40% less than an acute care facility. So it's going to make that market that much more competitive, because you're going to need to be able to cover your costs somehow. So you're going to see more hospitals trying to tackle this ASC market. And then having transparent and defined policies. So really making sure your patient selections are appropriate, having credentialing processes in place, appropriate discharge criteria, because that can also impact your efficiency if you have really long PACU delays or needing to transfer patients. Having appropriate reporting and escalations policies in place, and equipment inspections. So now on more to the topic of ASC efficiency and optimization. Efficiency is an operational, from those three domains, an operational type of decision criteria. And for those that may not be familiar with the term, efficiency is basically balancing your underutilized OR time to your overutilized OR time. Underutilized meaning time where the center is paying for staff to not be productive, and overutilized time is when you're running cases after your 3 or 5 p.m. time and you're having to pay overtime. It's much more expensive, 1.5 to about 2 times more. So here are a couple of different ways that you can assess your ASC efficiency. I will add that these can also be applicable to a hospital-based setting, but matching your staffing allocations as closely as possible to scheduled workload, kind of intuitive. Measuring your total delays per day that happen. You don't want to aggregate this data. You want to be able to have measurable and identifiable areas that you can improve. The turnover times, I was very impressed that Dr. Woda said his turnovers in an inpatient unit were 17 minutes. That is quite impressive. Yeah. In academic medicine, turnovers. broach anywhere from like 45 minutes to more than an hour. So in ASCs, I think the goal is around 20 minutes, but something to closely monitor. Minimizing case cancellations, that obviously eats into your bottom line, and then you're paying for labor costs without productivity. Assessing frequency and the duration of PACU delays, calculating your contribution your contribution margin per hour. That can help you assess the health of your OR and what kind of margins you will have. And then tracking prediction biases and precision. And what that is, if you estimate a case to be about 2 hours, but then it goes on for 2 hours and 15 minutes, your prediction was within 15 minutes. So that's considered pretty precise. But if it went on for an extra hour, then that would not be considered having high or valuable prediction precision. One area where you may accept having less efficient ORs if you are trying to build out a new service. So if you want to include minimally invasive spine in your ASC, you will allow for kind of unutilized OR or underutilized block time to have that surgeon, as they slowly build their practice, come in and have the ability to access OR time and have that flexibility in the schedule. So you may have to take a short-time financial hit for a long-term gain. Some ways that you can look at your block scheduling to help improve the efficiency. So staggering block release times. So if you're able to do that in advance and have different services release at different times, that can improve your flexibility and improve your ability for other services to access the OR. It will end up maximizing your utilization. Having longer block times as opposed to a shorter block time. So in an ASC, sometimes our block times are a little bit shorter than a traditional inpatient hospital setting, but not doing things that are a 2-hour block, 4-hour block. You really want to reach towards those 8-hour block, 10-hour block times. The reason being, with the same surgeon, the reason being is if a case finishes early and you have another block, surgeon that has another block afterwards, they may not be available. They may be in clinic. Or if you have the cases that run late, then you're making a surgeon wait, and that, as we all know, doesn't generally go over super well. So having these longer blocks can help prevent that and maximize your utilization. Having surgeon-specific blocks rather than service-specific blocks can also help. So that way there's ownership and accountability if the block isn't filled. When you have a service that covers the entire block, they may not know how the priority booking works or how things get released, and you can have unfilled block time and underutilized OR time. Doing block booking can help with efficiency because it streamlines the process. It's familiar doing case after case that's the same for a team. So if you do all left shoulders on a Tuesday or all right cataracts on a Thursday, that really helps the OR team with their efficiency. And then considering the surgeon clinical schedule can help as well. So if you know that your orthosurgeon has a fracture clinic on Tuesdays and that you maintain a flexible, or what's referred to as an open OR block on Wednesdays for them to add on those last minute fractures, that can help with some of your efficiency and actually your opportunity. Some OR optimization strategies, like anything in life, planning ahead will get you very far. In the OR setting or ASC setting, you want to give yourself enough of a time frame to add extra cases on, contact extra surgeons if you need to make changes. When we find out about things the day before, that really leaves little wiggle room to try and fill that spot or make the appropriate changes or optimize the patient. And then unfortunately, you run into underutilized OR time. Having standardized bulk codes can be really helpful. Historical data can be inaccurate for a variety of reasons, and that has to do with modifiers and codes that get added on, like a lap chole with a lysis of adhesions may be booked in your EMR as like 120 minutes compared to just a traditional lap chole booked as 80 minutes, and all those difference in times can create inaccuracies. So if you standardize your codes, that can help with scheduling your surgical cases and your blocks. We are seeing centers that are moving more towards machine learning in this to help with this weakness currently in block scheduling. Differentiating between long turnovers and delays, because delays obviously can occur for a variety of reasons. A patient violated NPO status, maybe someone's not available, but a turnover, if you're missing staff or you don't have the appropriate resources to set up the next case, those things you need to look at and not lump the data together. Because if you have at the end of a week and you look at your data that says all delays accounted for 17 hours, then you're not going to know, was that on Monday when the vendor didn't show, or, the rep wasn't there. You won't have an idea of where you can fix and target your efforts. You do want to assess your efficiency and utilization every independent day of the week and per surgeon per service. And having what's called complete enumeration can also be helpful for efficiency. And what this is looking at your surgical cases and scheduled times and matching it to your support staff shifts. So if you have nursing staff that works for 8 hours, 10 hours, or 12-hour shifts, looking at that with your case scheduling, and at what point will your shift model and staffing ratios, the inflection point, will lead to a decrease in efficiency. So it may be beneficial to have 4 8-hour nurses and then 3 12 hours rather than 5 12 hours. So kind of playing with those staffing models through this process of complete enumeration can help with your efficiency as well. And then this is intuitive, not scheduling cases in an overutilized room when you have other block time available. So in OR2, if traditionally your ASC days run until 4 and that day is going to run until 5 and the surgeon wants to add another case in that room, wouldn't make sense if OR4 ended at 2 p.m. because now you have all that underutilized OR time in the other OR. So making sure that you're able to float your cases appropriately to have maximally utilized time in each OR. So now on to a little bit of the finances for ASCs, talking about maximizing revenue. Focusing if you're ASC, you have to kind of predetermine your goals. Do you want to be a multi-specialty site or a single specialty site? Single specialty sites, extremely efficient, kind of like an outpatient GI unit. They have a well-oiled machine running. However, you have more risk because you're completely dependent on that service. So when there is the GI conference nationally once a year, your business is going to plummet that week. Whereas if you're a multi-specialty site, then it kind of diversifies your business risk. So you're able to have flexibility and schedule maybe more spines during that week, or maybe more oncology cases. Having surgeries with high volume potential, again, GI, really high volume, ortho cases, scopes, knee scopes, shoulder scopes. Allowing for optimal OR allocation. So again, that's back to the scheduling and labor costs, assessing your blocks and matching those appropriately. Having streamlined billing and claim processes. So assessing what is your payer mix? How often does payer A take to pay a standard claim? What is the turnaround time? Do you have cash pay patients? Are you having to send a lot to collections? Really evaluating your finances and your billing process to constantly assess it and see where your health is in that realm. Auditing reimbursements can be really helpful, and using a third party. No matter our best intentions, when we look at our own self-performance, there's inherently biases in those. So you want to make sure that if you have a third party, it's going to help remove some of that. They may be able to find areas where there's missed opportunity and you're maybe not billing for things that you should be, and you could be increasing your revenue or your claims. And then maybe they'll find areas where, hey, you really shouldn't be charging or adding this code or modifier. So it is beneficial to have a third party. And then monitoring for insurance changes, those are constantly changing and will affect your reimbursement. And then your marketing ROI. So typically you want to see anywhere from a 3 to 5 time return. And this could be either through social media if you're using that platform, or what efforts you're using to recruit surgeons, brand swag, things like that. Ways to minimize your cost, again, back to labor, so having appropriate staffing allocation, reducing overutilized OR time. That is, again, just very, very expensive. So trying to maximize using your full OR day in your block time and not running into under or overutilized OR time. Having bulk supply ordering with your equipment. I don't know if anyone out here is a Costco fan, but I'm a huge Costco fan. I go there all the time. And it's kind of the same concept. So if you're able to buy in more bulk, then you may be able to have a discounted price. You want to avoid waste with equipment, medications. That's obviously very costly, just throwing away money. Case cost analyses and looking at your case contribution margins, those can be very helpful. The surgeon preference card actually plays pretty significantly into this component. So surgeons may or may not be aware that what they're pre-selecting on their cards can impact the case contribution margin. And so if you have a standardized one that allows just for a couple personal touches, then you can save on that case contribution margin, and it actually also improves your efficiency. So being transparent with those selection cards and standardizing them more can help with that. It's just another way to focus on minimizing your cost. And then vendor capital and availability. If you are looking to start an ASC, it's a massive undertaking with huge financial needs. And there are a lot of med tech and device companies out there that are looking to closely work together with physicians to start ASCs. So they may be able to provide some upfront capital with the hope that they'll get future POs from you. A lot of vendors do like working directly with ASCs because there's not as much red tape and hospital committees that have to take to be able to approve a device. So it is beneficial for them as well. Now on building a brand and culture. As mentioned previously, healthcare is a business at the end of the day, so having a really strong brand that's represented well in a positive culture will significantly impact the health and success of your ASC. Most hospitals do have a mission vision statement. Now a lot are moving towards adding values as well. But just because you're an ASC doesn't mean that you can't have that. And so I like to say have a mission, vision, and a value proposition. You want to work on a strong narrative that's going to speak to whoever your customer is that you're trying to target, whatever that is going to most appeal to their decision criteria. So for a mission, it's basically like your ASC purpose. So who are you? What do you want to accomplish? What is your purpose? And who are you trying to accomplish that for? So that's identifying that customer. The vision, that's your ASC dream, and this will change as time goes on, so you're going to have to continuously update it. But where do you want to be in 1 year, 5 years, 10 years? What status do you want your ASC to hold compared to all those competitors and the hospital? For the value proposition, this is going to be your differentiator. So how are you able to stand out against the rest of the competition? What do you offer? How are you going to fulfill a need? So if you are doing minimally invasive spine and the other ASCs in your area are not, that is your differentiator. This is how you should value or advertise to your market. I think a lot of us have heard the customer is always right. I think that does also apply into healthcare, but it depends what customer you're talking about. So we have more than just the patient as our customer, right? The surgeon is also our customer. Our coworkers, our staff, our employees are also customers that you need to consider. You want people to be happy. They want to be proud of the brand that they work for. The patient may have priorities such as no delays, really strong perioperative communication, being called the night before, no surprise billing. The surgeon, no delays as well, having anesthesiologist flexibility. You want to be able to take this feedback and criticism as well and have a way to implement and improve it. So for your work culture, it will impact the brand and type of team that you're able to build. And recruiting and retaining those customers is vitally important, again, to the success of your business. So creating that positive work culture, you want to identify what type of work culture you want to have. And if you're going to make that promise, you want to be able to hold on to it and fulfill it. Ensuring recognition, so safety saves or coming in when someone called out sick just to help out the team, all of those kind of things where you create an individual recognition can go a really long way, even at an ASC. Creating career growth opportunity, just because we're not in a hospital setting where there's tons of different job positions doesn't mean that you can't have career growth in your ASC. So if someone is more interested in administrative responsibilities or wants to train as a first assist, having those things available can make an employee really want to dedicate and take pride in their work. Having predictable work hours. This goes not just to having things not run late, because I think most people don't appreciate when things go late, but also having consistent cases. So a lot of staff may be paid hourly, and if you don't book all of your blocks for that day and have underutilized OR time, that staff often gets sent home and they may not be able to make their bills that month. So trying to fulfill that maximized utilized OR time so your staff can have dependent hours is really important.
So I'll open it up. Anybody have any questions?
Is for the first presenter about how about SGLT1s and the risk of aspiration? What is your guideline are you currently following for that? Any other diabetic meds like Januvia, how many days to not use? Oh no, never mind, that's a different issue. SGLT1s.
Yeah, that's a great question. Again, that's one I hear every single day. We have about 150 anesthesiologists at Ohio State right now. We have 150 opinions at Ohio State right now. Dr. Harder and his organization have decided that the answer is if you take it once a week, you stop it for a week. If you take it once a day, you stop it for a day. That's what the ASA has said as their guidelines, which is, I think, good. Unfortunately, let me just say, I don't know about all of you, but the communication to the patients sometimes is a little frightening and they don't get the information. And I have a really hard time canceling cases for somebody who did a bowel prep that's 80 years old that came in and took Wegovy 4 days ago. I mean, it just kills me to cancel those people. And I took a deep dive into what's the difference between a guideline and a rule. And our quality officer told me that this is a guideline. And basically, it's not a rule, it's not a policy, it's a guideline. And I have the freedom as a practitioner to put that into my whole opinion as to what to do. So that's kind of the spectrum of the 150 anesthesiologists. We have all the way from the very rigid, follow it to the letter of the law, to me. And I'm probably the other extreme. I look at every patient and I kind of ask them a couple questions. Do you reflux? Do you vomit every day? Do you have a lot of problems? Do you feel like you have food all the time? Do you have heartburn all night, all the time? How long have you been taking it? You know, I've been taking it for 5-6 years. I mean, if a patient gives me nothing to make me concerned about them, I will frequently do the case. I'll be honest with you. But I do not, that is not me denying that the guideline exists. And I think we're woefully short on research to tell us whether this is an aspiration risk. We have a project that we're putting together right now where one of the gastroenterologists and I, we kind of want to take a dive into this, and I want to compare that to ultrasound of the stomach because I know that that's become a hot topic, and I want to know whether people can actually predict what they're going to get into when they get in there, if they're looking at the combination of GLP-1, what do I see when I do an ultrasound, and how often is there something really there, and how often is there a real risk? Complicated question. I think the sooner we can get all the patients just to follow the rules, we probably won't have a question, but I'm not really sure that I personally believe there's a big outcome issue out there. I just don't see it. Ron?
It's guidance, which isn't even, that's even at a lower level than a guideline. Guideline, we tend to have some at least literature support for that, but this was largely just expert opinion of people who were knowledgeable in that area based on some anecdotal reports. But we felt like it was important enough to at least increase awareness out there, and I think it certainly has done that. But it also is not something that, because I've had members reach out to me, well, now we have to do this, and it's not at all that. Each institution has to figure out what makes sense for them. And there is a multi-specialty society guideline that ASA has been a participant in that'll be published simultaneously across multiple specialty society journals that gives a little more, individualization of talk to the gastroenterologist or whoever the proceduralist, how long has the patient been on it, what symptoms are they having, et cetera. So it gives a little more, I think, flexibility and latitude to apply it to the specific case.
All right, thank you. There was a question in the back.
Any experience with remimazolam and any insight into impact for anesthesia services, experience with use, any comments?
We use REMI fairly frequently in nerve monitoring cases where we can maintain a low MAC on our SIVO and still use midazolam to help prevent any recall of the procedure and maybe even run a low flow of propofol in the background. And this seems to be very effective. We also use the same technique in spinal anesthesia as well when these long, large procedures are performed, so we can rapidly wake the patient and test them. So I would say in pediatric anesthesia, at least, we use this very frequently. And since I had the microphone, is it proper to ask a question of Dr. Woda at this time as well?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Dr. Woda, I noticed that on television, at least, they advertise, like nasal CPAP masks and things. Are there any problems with escape of air through the mouth or the airway that interferes with keeping the patient oxygenated or interferes with the procedure?
Are you talking about there isn't, because the flow is so high, it creates the pressure before it has a pop-off valve to lose the pressure. So the flow is so high, you don't need to create a seal. Actually, you don't want a seal at that flow rate, or you would probably, another alleged issue out there is like pneumothorax or something.
Yeah.
Something like that, but no, it's not an issue.
Do you find much insufflation of the stomach in addition to what the endoscopist provides?
Another great question. There are people that have suggested it's a concern. I don't, by experience, have an answer, and the company denies that at 2 to 4 centimeters of water of CPAP, which is allegedly what it's providing, that it's opening up the lower esophageal sphincter and it's letting air in. So, that's kind of their answer is it's only 2 to 4 centimeters of water. It's not like it's 20 centimeters of water. So if it's only 2 to 4, it's not that much, and it's not opening up the sphincter. That's how they would give an answer.
Thank you, Dr. Woda.
Can I add a little cost consideration since that's my area of interest? So for high flow nasal cannula, if you are at an ASC thinking that piece of equipment is too expensive for me, it's single use. The company did come out with a multi-use more environmentally friendly product. I don't know if you guys are using that, but it can be used up to 30 patients in a 24-hour period. The only thing that you're exchanging is the actual physical nasal piece that Dr. Woda had on his slides. So that is an area that you can look at your case volumes and see if you are doing a GI unit where you're having just really high case volumes every day, it is actually financially beneficial to do it that way.
Jim, may I ask an additional comment since I'm here? But the reason I mentioned Dr. Desmond Henry and the fact that he changed my life is that I feel that we have an obligation to encourage the medical students and other residents that may not know what they want to do in life. And I kind of had the same experience with becoming an anesthesiologist, but I encourage you today, during the time that I was in residency training in the military, there wasn't a lot of interaction of the medical students or residents attending the ASA conferences, to my knowledge, because we weren't included. But today, I think we can really grow the AOCA double and triple, really, by reaching out to these students and getting poster projects involved and encouraging them to be part of our research. They're eager to be scientists. They want to have an advantage because it is so very competitive in residencies nowadays. I'd just like to encourage everyone to reach out. Thank you.
All right, thank you for that. I just wanted to follow up kind of on this high flow nasal oxygen. The cost use, and presumably do you just use it on high-risk patients, or do you use it on every patient?
Yeah, I mean, to her point about cost, it is actually much less than everyone thinks, because you buy the initial unit at one cost. I don't know, am I allowed to say how much? I don't know. $5,000 to $7,000 for this stand that has a humidifier on it, and its attachment to the wall at 50 liters in the wall and all that. And then you only pay $100 for the nasal cannula, and you don't change the whole system after every case. You only, is that what you're talking about?
Correct.
Yeah. So it's only $100. To me, I think that's cheap. I mean, personally, when you look at the cost of the procedure and you consider one time that you have a failed case a day that you have to intubate, or put somebody in the ICU or whatever. I mean, I think $100 personally, I think is very inexpensive. So that's our experience. Is that your experience with the cost?
I would like to add, I'm not paid by that company either. I have no financial attachment to that company.
I sound like I do, but I don't. I just like the product.
Yeah, I will admit it's mostly used in our inpatient service at our main hospital at Stanford more than our ASCs, but it is definitely infiltrating our ASC surgery market right now. We're working pretty closely with the company to implement it there, more than just our GI labs. It's actually going to be for a lot of other cases as well.
And to your other question about who, I would like to tell you it's high risk. I have a little card hanging on the machine that I tell the providers they have to follow, and it says all the high-risk types of patients. But I got to be honest with you, that I think they ignore it and put it on everybody.
Okay.
And I'm waiting for somebody to call me from the hospital, but they haven't yet. So
All right.
my answer will be, I've explained to our group that they have to follow guidelines and not use it on everyone. That's my answer. That's why my little card's hanging there. But I don't really care if they use it on everybody, because I think it's safer, I think it's easier, and I think the patients do so much better. I can't tell you the last time I got called to the room for a blue patient that needed intubated, since we got that. It's been quite a few months, actually.
All right. Other questions? Yep.
I have a question for Dr. Kukuruza.
Kelsey, yeah.
How do I say that?
That's
right?
correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
I personally also interface with perioperative service optimization, and rather than having cases not go long enough in a prime time block time, we're finding we have, for lack of the opportunity to put it a different way, we'll have surgeons put cases on knowingly that it is booked for less time than they know they'll need, because there isn't another time that matches their preferences of where to put it in order to get it done. And what we're finding, and I'm sure everybody is in some version of shortage in their hospitals, is that if you have prime time 7 to 3 and then you start drawing down after that, that we're having more and more people having to stay more late in order to finish cases, because cases were delayed, pushed back, or they might have knowingly underbooked it because they knew they wouldn't be able to get it on the schedule otherwise. How do you address these types of practices in a mutually respectful but accountability holding avenue?
Thank you so much for that question. That is a very hot topic, and unfortunately has to be politically traversed very carefully. And it goes both ways. So surgeons may actually underbook their block because they want to allow wiggle room to be able to add on things last minute. They'll do that in the hospital and ASC setting, or in your case, they're underestimating their cases, so that way they can book more. That is where sometimes the management systems and the data, the way that you process your cases and have transparency in your bookings can be helpful. That, again, may or may not be favorable. Not everyone likes to be faced with real data that shows they're not performing to what they're saying they're going to do. But there are management systems that will provide data that show the surgeons how they're performing, and then potentially say that you cannot book this. So then it would take the middleman out of the process. But I think transparency and conversations and building good relationships can go a really long way. Unfortunately, it's not like the a one-all applicable solution, but that's generally how we approach those. And we are fortunate that we have a very large staffing as well, so we do just run cases late and pay people overtime, but that is not always favorable for staff either.
I'll throw my 2 cents in on that one. We follow a metric called case length accuracy. And if you don't abide by your case length accuracy metric, we do a little more than a pleasant conversation. You may lose your block time. You may lose your 7:30 start. You may lose some things. So she's wonderful and nice, and I'm old and mean. And I believe in being punitive sometimes. And I think if you're going to game the system and book a case for an hour and it takes you 5, the anesthesia staff's not staying. They didn't sign up for that. The nursing staff didn't sign up for that. And you got to have a mechanism to deal with it. And it might have to be punitive because depending upon the center, there's financial issues as well. You know, if you don't pay for the center and it doesn't affect you, what do you care? You like to operate till 10 o'clock on Tuesdays because the kids are out. They don't care. I'm not going to see anybody. But it's not fair to run a center that way. So we have some punitive mechanisms and some metrics so that it's not just personality bias. It's actually driven by data. And I think that's how you take it off your shoulders.
I think my microphone is off up front here. I just had a couple of questions. It's a multi-pronged question. ASCs, we seem, at least where I practiced, there was a large poaching of staff to the ASCs. I was wondering, I know that it's a lifestyle benefit. You're not doing call. Does the pay typically, is it relatively equal pay, or do they take a pay cut for ASCs? Yes, and nursing and every other staff. And the second part of that was, are you seeing a trend with ASCs towards enlarging or lengthening their hours to evenings and weekends to accommodate surgeons?
Really great questions. So in terms of the anesthesiologist pay, I am a W-2 employee, so I am paid the same regardless of where I go. I think it would depend on your payer mix and how your reimbursement blended units would be depending on where your group covers. So if they do cover some inpatient services, I think that would really be up to each individual anesthesia group, or if you're part of an academic.
So maybe more for the ancillary staff and support staff, nursing, et cetera?
Yeah, so to my knowledge, at the main hospitals, there are some salaried staff, whereas at our ASC centers and other facilities as well, they are hourly paid. So I think it is a hybrid. So some people may or may not be paid more. As I mentioned, we are having overnight stays at our ASCs now, so I think there is incentive for that pay. And then to move on to the second question about operating more days, and I think the answer is yes. And we are operating later as well. So there is a trend to extend the ASC hours, and the support staff are the ones that are kind of causing a little bit of the limit. I think the anesthesia group could have a strong say if you're not at a big academic center where you're just an employee, but rather like a smaller, maybe medium-sized practice. You could have more influence on that. Unfortunately, those decisions are way, 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 way above me where I work. But yes, there is expansion. We are starting to do elective cases on the weekends as well as extending hours.
And one final question for Dr. Williams. That the fascinating video you showed at the beginning, the Thailand rescue.
Yes, sir.
Was there any monitoring of the
Not to my knowledge.
patients?
That's a very good question. At least in the videos, I didn't see any evidence of monitoring except for fogging of face masks and maybe at but that's a very good point. I think in operational medicine and the Army, of course, in the field, now we have state-of-the-art monitors that include, pulse oximeters and automated blood pressure cuffs that can be deployed to medics and provide kind of state-of-the-art care. We have vein viewers that can start IVs in the field, and we can train the syringe pumps. That's okay. Hold it in the middle, okay. So with the use of syringe pumps in the fields also to deliver different types of medication, to deliver ongoing medications, but I'm not sure about the monitoring.
All right. Any other questions before? Yes, Dr.
Hi, Suzanne Hufnagel from Jefferson Hospital in Philadelphia. My question is, how do you handle procedures at an outpatient facility that have a potential for blood loss, but usually it's not? We have a new center that opened up, and it's across the street from our hospital. There's no tubing system or anything like that, and we have a way to handle bringing people over to the main hospital. But right now, they're not allowing any patient to be scheduled over there that has a potential for needing a blood transfusion.
I can help answer that. So currently what we're doing to monitor our transfusion assessments is pulling historical case data and how often have you had to transfuse in this case, rather than just the gestalt of whether or not you think this is going to be a high blood loss surgery. And so you could use for your hospital or facility the kind of typical data for those cases that you're performing with your surgeons and develop thresholds of where you would have, again, goes back to those strict guidelines and having as a management priority, an ASC management priority, having those guidelines in place, and you could develop those for your center and where you want to have that trigger threshold in place. But really monitoring your data. Historical accurate data is just so critically important, and unfortunately it can be inaccurate if you just pull it with slicer dicer. So making sure there's data integrity is also really important, but requires a lot of labor.
This question's for Dr. Williams. Since you do 100% pediatric practice, and knowing that often most cases are under general and NORA is more towards some level of sedation, what is your strategy for something like you're in the ER or doing NORA case for like a closed fracture reduction, given the NORA types of equipment and things that you would typically use for the edification of those that may see these types of cases where they have to sedate in the ED?
Our electronic medical record is integrated into the same mainframe as in the operating room. So when I start a case in the emergency room, it's automatically incorporating the data that may be in the individual emergency room that's much smaller. I've really come to enjoy using ketamine because it's amazing that the orthopedic surgeons can set these fractures that sometimes can be fairly complex, and the children are quite comfortable, and the Versed does its job. Of course, we have the same standardization of airway equipment and defibrillators and airway carts that are available down in the emergency room, but sometimes, as I said earlier, these can occur as emergencies or after hours, so you're frequently by yourself. So I count on the other physicians that are there, the emergency physicians, or if I have a very small infant, that I can call up to the ICU and one of the NICU or PICU doctors can come down. I think the medications have been improved over the years, and this is similar really to my practice in the military and has been quite helpful. We use the same standardized ASA monitors to ensure that we have patency of the airways and maintain our saturations, and use nasal cannulas. But sometimes the positioning can get difficult in an emergency room bed because the patients are often pulled to one side to the edge of the bed. Something I found helpful are these large, wide Velcro straps that you have the patient secured, that they're not going to immediately just roll off the bed, since no one really is holding them while they're operating on an arm or a leg or an ankle. Mainly in the emergency rooms, we're just setting the fractures, and then they may apply some casting materials or plaster and wrap them up and send them on their way. Frequently, if these aren't set correctly, we'll see them back in the operating room, so we're familiar with them. Did that answer your question?
All right. Well, thank you everyone for your questions. We're at the time and we need to conclude the session. You'll be asked to provide your feedback on this session when completing the attestation form at the end of the convention. Please join me in thanking Drs. Russell Roeder, Guy Williams, and Kelsey Cucaruza for their great talks. Thank you.